Star Wars is broken. And no, not because of wokeness or lack of a clear plan from Lucasfilm. Although, Disney, what is this I'm hearing about Earth to Ned and Willow just not being on Disney Plus anymore? We love Earth to Ned. We love Willow. Put them back. But no, Star Wars is broken because of a narrative issue. One that has existed since the very start of the first movie, but has grown in recent years to the point where it has become unavoidable. The droids are a problem. They've always operated in a gray area, but as the series has expanded, more of that gray area has been filled in. Rules made, lines drawn, and I think we're headed down the wrong path. So, to save Star Wars from itself, we need to answer two fundamental questions once and for all. What are the droids, and what should they be? And Pop Culture Detective made a great video called The Tragedy of Droids in Star Wars, which you should watch after this, that asked a similar question. Are the droids sentient, and what are the implications of that question? They more or less concluded that droids gain sentience over time, hence all of the memory wipes. Resetting the droids to a more basic intelligence makes them more effective workers and soldiers, and obviously the implications of that are not great, but in the years since they made that video, we've gotten a lot of new information about droids that has challenged some of the things we thought we knew. And specifically, one episode of a certain show really got me thinking about not only what droids are, but why leaving them in this gray area is such a mistake. Now, I'm going to, in this video, focus on the live action material mostly, only because I think that's what counts. That cannot be retconned, or at least so far, Star Wars has yet to retcon a live action thing the same way they have with things like the Legends books, or even some of the recent comics. And yes, the holiday special was retconned, but they also just went around and just destroyed that so no one could have it, although that's not unlike what they're doing with Earth to Ned. But if something conflicts between the films and shows and the books and comics, the films and show thing tends to win. So those are all the hard and fast rules we need to deal with, which is good because I've also not read all of the books and comics and I don't want to. I'm going to say games like Fallen Order count too, although I think if a conflict arises, the films and shows will win out over that game, and the game will end up being changed. Also, I'm not going to spoil Jedi Survivor. I also have not seen Rebels or all of Clone Wars, so if there are some droids in there that I'm missing, I apologize. There's only so many hours in the day. And yes, I know of Chopper. I've heard his deal is that he is just a droid who has been alive for a very long time and does not care. He will kill anybody. That sounds like a lot of fun, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to put him aside. Also, real quick, I want to define sentience. What does it mean? Well, it's a complex idea, but in its simplest terms, sentience is the capacity to feel, experience the world through sense, have emotions, being aware of your own existence. So a toaster, not sentient, but a droid, that seems sentient. Like C-3PO. He is 100% sentient. 3PO is afraid, he is worried about his own safety, which would suggest he values his life, which means he knows it exists, he shows off some emotions, pride, anger, C-3PO holds a grudge, he makes friends. I think it is difficult to argue that 3PO is not at least some form of sentient. Rogue One's K2SO works the same way. He can speak English, basic, and expresses emotions. K2 seems to be aware that some of these emotions are governed by settings he has no control of, but also, he exhibits behavior that makes no sense as a setting. He gets bored, petty, and anxious. A lot of droids like R2-D2, BB-8, and BD-1 are not as clear about how they feel because they don't speak basic, but again, the people who can understand them react in such a way that would suggest these droids are at least somewhat sentient. Luke and Poe are both affectionate to their droids, they hug them, protect them, call them by their names, and sure, some people do the same thing with their cars, but if the cars could also hold conversations and were concerned about their own self-preservation, I think there would be a strong case for car sentience. Then you've got droids like D-O who can speak, and also this droid has PTSD, so he has a feeling that he is able to express verbally. And the people around D-O don't ignore the droid's feelings because it's a machine, they respect its wishes like you would another person, or a pet. Kenobi features a few new droids. When Ned, the loader droid, dies, Tala tears up as she would if she lost a friend. Also in Kenobi, Leia comments that the other kid is a jerk because he is mean to droids, which would suggest that they're at least somewhere around pet level intelligence. Otherwise, what's she saying? This kid is being mean to the toaster? And if so, who cares? I guess that's a weird thing to do, but it's only cruel if the object of the derision has feelings to hurt. And Leia and her parents act like Lola, Leia's ladybug droid, does have feelings, and respecting those feelings is seen as a virtue in universe. But Lola does bring up another interesting issue. All of the droids we've mentioned so far serve a specific function. They are protocol droids or astromechs, security droids, loaders. D-O is a data storage droid. BD-1 is a companion droid used to survey land. Andor's B2EMO is a salvage droid, although he seems to be mostly around for sentimental reasons. But what function does Lola serve? Are there droids that, like some pets, are just there to be loved and keep people company? According to Wikipedia, Lola is a toy droid. So I guess that's something. It's a job she can do. Play with Leia the same way that another person would play hide and seek or whatever. So okay, all of the droids have a job. They work, and they are all somewhat sentient. You know what that means. In Episode 4, C-3PO is treated like an enslaved person. He is captured and sold to the Larses with the express purpose of performing a task, acting as some sort of middleman between humans and cyborgs. C-3PO does not have a choice in the matter, although he does make the point that he lives to serve, and that it is his nature. But then we hit another problem, which I will call the Dobby problem. Because sometimes the droids want to do this work for the humans. They love it. It's in their programming. But answers like these are difficult because on one hand, that could technically be true. If you were building droids and you could program them to feel emotions, or you knew they eventually would, making them enjoy work would be ideal so they continue to do it and don't revolt like in almost all other robot media. On the other hand, I think it makes sense if the sentient droids are able to work out that if they refuse to work or even show discomfort, their owners might want to reset them and their sentience would be destroyed. So, as a method of self-preservation, the droids make the calculation that they should pretend to enjoy serving the humans so they can continue to exist. It is a reasonable fear for a droid to have, and thus, it makes sense why they would pretend to like work. However, there are some droids that genuinely do seem to want to do their job, even if it means their own death. IG-11 dies fulfilling his purpose, so when given a choice and plenty of outs, he still sacrifices himself, which means he must really want to do that. No one is forcing him. What we would need to prove this wrong is a droid that does rebel and explains why. L337 f***s up everything we have learned about the droid so far. If you forgot or never saw Solo, L337 was the droid played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge that works as Lando's right-hand woman. And were it not for L337, I do not think most people would think of this as a big issue. Like the android problem, right? Why do some of these droids look more like people than others? Is it a design feature because that's how people prefer to interact with them? Or is it about the droids being able to best do their jobs? The one that they are hard-coded to want to do. It would make sense that the best way to design a servant droid like 3PO would be to make him look like the other human servants so that he can do his job well and be happy. Because either way, a person is designing these sentient droids in a way that aligns with the droid's happiness. So it's a good thing. Except, you see, L3 was an old R3 droid. You can kinda make this out if you focus on her head. Same shape as the top of R2. But she modified her own body, took parts from other astromech droids and built a torso so she would seem like more of a person. So some droids prefer to look like people, which means they have needs that go against their original programming. L3 is also very explicit about the fact that she does not want to serve and believes that most droids do not, which makes the fact that Lando has not freed L3 yet a bit upsetting. And indeed, on Kessel, when L3 removes the inhibitors from the droids in the control room, they revolt, like Dobby. Dobby is excited to be freed by Harry, which means at least some of these droids are working for people against their own will, which means they are enslaved. Even if only a few droids express the desire to rebel, the idea that they are all programmed to naturally want to serve people is either a lie or a misunderstanding of how droid sentience works, because as L3 explains it, droids learn and evolve and eventually gain some form of sentience. Just that simple. And it does not seem like she's the only one who ever did this. But like I said, we know this. Droids are sentient. The problem comes from how human characters in Star Wars interact with the droids. Enter The Mandalorian, the reason I decided to make this video. Forget about Din Djarin's droid racism, because sure, Din will not take off his helmet in front of Grogu, but he will in front of IG-11. However, it does take a second because it feels like Din, whether he wants to admit it or not, believes the droids are sentient. Otherwise, he wouldn't initially threaten IG when IG tries to take the helmet off. But Din hates droids because of a dramatic event. I would not say his feelings are representative of the average Star Wars person. In fact, his prejudice is treated how you would expect if droids are thought of as somewhat sentient by everyone else. People think Din's droid prejudice is somewhat unreasonable. It's not like someone who got in a plane crash so they don't fly anymore, not a fear, but a prejudice. Like someone who had a bad experience with someone of a different different race, and now he hates everybody from that race. And people find that weird. But Din is not the one I care about here. Not really. It's everyone else. Because Mandalorian gave us a look at how a lot of characters interact with droids, and those interactions revealed how they feel about the droids, and the droids' reactions to our characters also revealed something new. In episode 6 of season 3, Guns for Hire, we learn that the droids on some planets have their own culture and businesses. They have a drink that sort of functions like alcohol for humans, and while the bartender droid explains to Din and Bo that droids actually love to serve people, that is not what the rest of the episode would suggest. In this episode, Plazir 15, the planet where Din and Bo do a CSI, employs a small army of repurposed Imperial battle droids. They have all been reprogrammed to act like waiters and dock workers and all sort of other background characters in a CSI episode. But there is a problem. These droids are malfunctioning, but not returning to their original programming and just shooting everyone like they would during a war. They seem fed up. When Din kicks a droid over, it does not snap into battle mode and get in a fight with Din. It smacks him, but then runs away, like someone who feels guilty. And we will learn that this droid is part of a droid rebellion brought on by Christopher Lloyd's Commissioner Hellgate. Hellgate uses nanodroids that are able to control the regular droids, and the regular droids revert to their original programming. Except again, that is not what seems to be happening. It feels like L3, where the inhibitors are removed and the droids are able to do what they want, which is sometimes just go ballistic, but sometimes it's run away. So are the droids, when they are serving people, doing what they want? Was the memory wipe unsuccessful? Does Hellgate fake it and install his own programming, leaving the droids free to gain sentience in the meantime? I don't know, and it seems like neither does the show. Also, I still don't understand what Hellgate is after. Mostly because he's revealed to be a separatist who follows Count Dooku. So what does that mean? What do the separatists believe? From what I can gather, it depends. Your average separatist, the common man, is sort of a space libertarian. They oppose the galactic government's taxation, and they're against the enforcement of some laws. Like the Geonosians, the bug guys. They have gladiator fights, and the Federation would outlaw those. But a separatist would argue that the Foundation has no right to tell those cultures how to run their lives, and I get it. Simple enough. Except the high-level separatists were really a bunch of businessmen manipulating the movement, so they could get lower taxes and lax regulations. So, you know, how really rich people love small government and personal freedoms, but also want kids to work in the mines again. But then, one level above them, you've got Dooku and the Emperor who are secretly controlling the Senate and their enemies, the Separatists, to consolidate power and destroy the Jedi. It's all a big scheme. I don't know how much the average person ever found out about all of this. Does Hellgate know that Dooku was secretly working with the Emperor? After all, Dooku was murdered by someone who would become the Emperor's lackey. I could see your average Joe just thinking Dooku was always in it for states' rights. Maybe. I just don't know. And because of that, any sense of justice falls apart. Who's right in this scenario? Who's wrong? Is Hellgate opposing an oppressive government/monarchy based on his separatist principles? Or does he believe the freedom given to the people of Plazir is bad because unlimited droid labor is anti-capitalist, a belief that could also be informed by his separatist principles? We just don't know. This, for me, is the big problem. Star Wars and the droids and all of it. Originally, the metaphors were pretty clear. Star Wars was the Vietnam War, an allegory, it made sense. And not every detail matched up one-to-one, but through that lens, we could understand the morality of the series. But as Star Wars has expanded, the metaphors have taken on a life of their own, and parts of the universe without clear real-world analogs were constantly redefined. And no part of the universe has suffered more from this lack of direction than the droids. What is the morality of the droids? What should the characters in the Star Wars universe think of them? What should we think about that? If Mando kicks one, should we feel bad? The issue is not that Mando doesn't know, it's that it does not seem like Star Wars knows. We believe Luke Skywalker to be a pillar of morality. Sure, he has faults and questions himself, but we, the audience, generally expect Luke to do the right thing. So if we know the right thing is free the slaves, why doesn't Luke? He understands that they have emotions and personalities. Is Luke wrong? And does Star Wars know that? Luke doesn't treat the droids like they're sentient. If he is a moral character, you imagine he would. And if he's not, the movies don't seem to know. So then, if Luke treats the droids like servants and also treats them like friends, what else can we take from this but Luke owns slaves? He's nice to them compared to other characters like Owen or Mando, but he still owns slaves. And this creates a moral paradox. It's sort of like Wanda in Westview. By the end of the show, Wanda has done a terrible thing. She tortured a town, and we know that Wanda knew what she was doing. It may have started with a subconscious event that Wanda was not aware of, but by episode 3, we know she knows. So we know Wanda is doing something bad, enslaving and torturing the town. But at the end of the season, when Monica treats Wanda like the victim and lets her go, we hit a moral wall. Is the morality of the show wrong? Did Wanda actually do a bad thing? Is there something special about the Marvel Comics universe that justifies her actions? Because based on the morality of the series so far, and the morality of our world, we know Monica's reaction should be different. This was everyone's big complaint. And luckily, by Multiverse of Madness, the writers had figured this out. Wanda's death is understood to function as a penance. She did something wrong in Westview and during her pursuit of America Chavez, and she is punished for it. The universe has a morality we can understand. Emily St. James wrote a post on Vox after the WandaVision finale about the morality of shows like this. She wrote, "The use of story karma differs from story to story. In some cases, an exact balancing of the moral scales is called for. Star Wars, with its very clear-cut good versus evil binary, might be a good example. In others, good or innocent people will be asked to suffer endlessly because that is what the story requires of them. Think of the Stark kids from Game of Thrones. In still others, horrible people will get away with horrible things. Think of Tony Soprano or Breaking Bad's Walter White. In all of those cases, the storytellers tipped their hands to say, yes, we know what's going on, which made it easier to just enjoy the ride." I'm spending so much time here to really hammer home the fact that in universe, the droids are poorly defined. We do not know how we're supposed to feel when a droid who is not a main character dies. We need to invent a new context every time we meet new droids. Sometimes what would be catastrophes for humans are played as jokes with the droids. C-3PO gets his memory wiped in episode 9. Something similar happens in the movie Eternals. Thena is reaching the point where she goes into a berserker rage and needs to have her mind reset. But this is, reasonably, viewed as a tragic moment. I think Star Wars would do the same thing if that happened to Grogu or Luke or Andor, but not C-3PO. And this discrepancy feels wrong. So Star Wars needs to balance its story karma, and they have two options, and they're both bad. Either L3 was crazy and actually it's all okay, the droids like serving humanity, the Dobby problem, or Luke Skywalker owned slaves, and so did Princess Leia, and Mando, and Rey, and Poe, and Lando, and Andor, and even kindly Marva. They all owned members of a sentient race that at least sometimes did not want to work for them. And I think L3's rebellion proves it has to be that second thing. If you have one droid who does not want to serve and she is able to convince other droids to join her, that would suggest that many other droids feel the same way but cannot rebel. Let's look back at that bartender droid. He tells Din and Bo that no, droids actually like serving people. It's the least they can do since we created them. And yet, what happened earlier in that scene? Din and Bo entered the droid cantina, threatened the bartender droid, and told all of the droids they couldn't leave. And Din and Bo don't seem like official police. As far as the droids know, Din and Bo are just angry bounty hunters. So yeah, when threatened repeatedly with death by someone who appears to hate droids, and knowing that fighting back would probably result in their decommissioning, the droids say the thing Din and Bo want to hear. Is it because the droids believe that, or does that droid just want to survive that encounter? We don't know. Frequently, the droids are living under constant threat. Owen Lars, Din's droids, all the droids on Plazir, all the droids in the Empire, and many other manual labor droids. They know, like the bartender explains, that a rebellion or even any misbehavior is likely to result in what is essentially their death. Why would we believe the ones who say, oh, actually, the owner is nice and the situation is good? Especially if, when given a chance, more than a couple of droids prove that they do not want to be enslaved. But it isn't like Star Wars is ambivalent about the morality of slavery as a concept. We're supposed to understand that Anakin and Shmi being enslaved by Watto is a bad thing, right? Like, it's bad when humans are enslaved. So why not droids? What is the functional difference if droids are definitely sentient? But why choose? Why should Star Wars draw that line and address the issue that a big chunk of the main characters, the popular ones, might not really want to be here, and our other main characters are all slave owners? Why not just keep ignoring it, kick the can down the road? The droids are just droids. Whatever that means. Because without clear context, the morality of the series is a disaster. So much of science fiction is defined by context. If you just see a guy with a lightsaber, who knows what that means? We have little context for that item. But when you see a man we trust, give it to the protagonist, and the protagonist is amazed as he turns it on and twirls it around, we learn something. Luke treating the lightsaber with respect teaches us that this is a thing to be respected, and that gives us context about the Force and the Jedi, and Star Wars does this really well. And that's what makes episodes like Guns for Hire particularly difficult. The context the droids are in is used to define them, and that, mixed with what we already know, causes problems. Like, okay, L3 views droids as slaves, right? They're definitely at best an underclass, or a group of people or things that live on the lowest level of society. And we learn that Plaisir droids are being controlled by nanomachines snuck into their programming using something called Nepenthe. Nepenthe is described as a lubricant that also delivers refreshing subparticles that act as updates for the droids. And since the Nepenthe is served in a bar in the atmosphere of the Resistor, cute name, feels like every other Star Wars cantina we visited before, Nepenthe is meant to feel like droid alcohol. Makes sense. And we learn that Nepenthe makes the droids act up and sometimes harm the people of Plaisir. And the nanomachines are put in the Nepenthe by Hellgate as an attempt to sabotage the society. So I'm going to say that whole sentence again, but a little more vaguely. The brains of the servant underclass are being poisoned by alcohol, and they're losing control and acting dangerously. You know what that sounds like? Let's take a little detour into American history, to the single event that I find the most fascinating, Prohibition. The temperance movement in the United States was one of those right place, right time moments where a couple of groups all happened to have similar goals and were able to work together to achieve something pretty substantial. One of those groups was the Anti-Saloon League led by Wayne Wheeler, who's credited with inventing pressure politics, where a vocal minority focuses on a specific issue and uses propaganda to elevate that issue, and then pressures politicians directly to support the issue using financial incentive and public sentiment propped up by the propaganda. And one specific method Wheeler used to push prohibition was race-based propaganda. Clifford Kuhn writes in the New Georgia Encyclopedia, in addition to the political debates waged in the Journal and the Constitution, other newspapers, especially the Atlanta Georgian and the Atlanta News, carried stories throughout the year about alleged assaults on white women by black men. The media provoked anger and hatred in its white readers with stories, editorials, and cartoons warning of rising crime, the danger to white women, the disreputable saloons that encourage drunkenness, and licentious behavior in brutish men. So I'm going to describe that Star Wars thing again. Member of an underclass were being driven crazy by alcohol. They can't help themselves. The alcohol just makes them dangerous. Now, I'm not saying anyone behind Guns for Hire intended to make this episode into sort of an allegory for racist propaganda against African Americans leading up to Prohibition, but it does seem to have accidentally happened, except, and here's where it becomes extra f***ed, in the Star Wars version, the propaganda is true. The alcohol does make members of the underclass violent, it is a problem, and it's all a conspiracy to bring down the democratic government. The Dobby problem is not just when an enslaved character naturally likes being enslaved, it's bigger than that. In a vacuum, sure, the house elves like serving humans, that's how they were written. But when you match that to the very simple real-world allegory of human slavery, this idea is not just wrong, it is an actual viewpoint propagated by bigots, that some people just want to serve everyone, it's their natural state of being. Now, if the Star Wars droids were not frequently treated like an enslaved sentient population, this would not be an issue. In a bubble, this episode makes sense morally, but the history we have experienced with droids like 3PO, K2SO, and L3 is context that informs how we think about the droids. The problem is, Guns for Hire wants to ignore that context and have the droids just be toasters that can be easily reprogrammed and manipulated without any moral judgment on the part of any of our main characters, and it just does not work. And this is what I mean when I say I don't think Star Wars understands its own morality. Because if the people behind Star Wars were 100% sure that the droids were people, they all got together and decided from now on droids are people, since they're sentient, and they've pretty much been sentient the whole time, making this decision would set off an alarm in someone's head like, oh wait, look what we're doing. That's weird, right? Maybe it shouldn't be exactly that. Maybe we'll do something else. Get rid of alcohol, just make it some other signal, or make it something they eat. Really anything but alcohol makes this work. But because it doesn't seem like Star Wars understands what the droids are, doesn't seem to think about this stuff, and it drives me crazy. So bite the bullet. Yeah, the droids are an enslaved population, and Luke and Din and Rey and all the good guys all own slaves. And maybe that makes people uncomfortable, but we need to pick, because the inaction is just as bad. And this is the good part. Not only would clearing this up help more clearly define the morality of the series, the droids are the great untapped well of Star Wars storytelling potential. We can be done with Empire knockoffs. I love Thrawn as much as the next guy, but wouldn't it be fun if one of these movies and shows was not only about identical armies of fascists led by either a Darth Vader knockoff or a Tarkin knockoff? Instead, what if one of these shows or movies actually spent time interrogating the idea of droid sentience? Perhaps there's a new thread in the Outer Rim that Rey needs to go investigate as the head Jedi. But when she gets there, Rey does not find the first or second or third order. Instead, Rey discovers an army of droids that are liberating other droids and killing the people who enslave them. Bad guy could be a Magneto type, or more on the nose, Ramatra from Overwatch, charismatic vengeful droid leader with a grudge, and perhaps BB or R2 or DO can join this resistance. Now, Rey and Finn and whichever other actors get a visit from the dump truck full of money need to figure out who is right and what the galaxy needs to do about slaves. This is not only new and interesting storytelling, but it solves Star Wars' biggest problem. So that is all I've got to say about that. The droids are both clearly sentient and owned by characters we like, and the Star Wars movies and shows need to figure that out because that symbolism can be very bad. Now, as I'm sure you can tell, a lot of things here are different. I have a different background, different mic, of course, different lighting, also facial hair. But I have a new space, and I want to make a fresh start, so I changed some things. And when I wanted to learn about lighting, I went to the best place to learn a new skill, this video sponsor, Skillshare. And I just typed in lighting video to see what came up, and look who it is, Jordy Vanderput's class, Introduction to Lighting for Videography. I've done a bunch of these for Skillshare, and I always end up doing Jordy stuff, but it's good. You get an intro to different kinds of lighting techniques and everything you need to get started. And there are tons of other classes on this topic, so depending on how in-depth you want to go, there's a class for you. Now, maybe you're not interested in making videos. Well, Skillshare has the tools to help progress in whatever journey you're on. They've got classes on drawing, creative writing, organization, interior design, everything. And the best part is, Skillshare is offering 1 month free to any of my viewers that use the link in the description box. So go check it out. I think you'll find something cool. So thank you to everybody that continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody who listens to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, everybody who follows the channel on Twitter, Twitch, all that stuff. I'm Nando V Movies on all those platforms, and everybody who watches these videos early on Nebula. That's all I got. Stay safe. See you next time.